Welcome back to another episode of the Field of 68's off-season grades. And today I am joined by none other than Jeff Goodman, and we are going to be breaking down his favorite team in the sport of college basketball this year, the Kentucky Wildcats. There were a lot of changes to Kentucky in the offseason, Jeff. Quite literally, every single player that was on the roster last year is gone, as well as basically the entire coaching staff is gone. John Calipari has left. Reed Shepherd has left. Rob Dillingham has left. Justin Edwards has left. Everybody has left. In Cal stead, new head coach Mark Pope, former Kentucky legend. We talked quite a bit in the offseason about what we thought of him. Before we get into the roster, before we get into the transfers, before we get into some of the freshmen that are coming in, I just want big picture. Now you're about 3 months into Pope's tenure. You've had a chance to talk with him. We've had him on the Field of 68 already. Where do you stand on Pope? Where do you stand on how he's going about building this program? Where do you stand on what he's done to make sure that Kentucky does not have a drop-off during this coaching change?
Well, I think first and foremost, he's won over the fan base quickly, and part of it was I think the fan base was ready to move on, or a large segment was ready to move on from John Calipari. And then you brought in one of your own, and everybody loves one of their own, right? Everybody wants to go back to the glory days, and when Mark Pope was part of some of those great teams that Rick Pitino had. Now the question becomes, can Mark Pope blend some of the really, really talented players, some of the pros that John Calipari had in Lexington, with some of the more experienced program guys that he had success with at BYU? And if he can do that, then I think you've got a team and a program that can contend for Final Fours again. I don't think they're there yet, and I think it's ridiculous to think that in year one, even in the portal era, you can flip it quick enough with, like you said, an entirely new team and staff and compete for a Final Four. Now, can they win? Think about this, Rob. They have won one tournament game since 2019, since that Elite Eight run. One tournament game. So if Mark Pope goes to the second weekend this year, they should throw him a friggin' parade compared to what they've done.
I love how we're talking about Mark Pope and you still find a way to get a shot in at John Calipari, man. It's unbelievable your ability to find a way to do that. No, you're not wrong though, right? Like what Kentucky was maybe last year is a little bit of an outlier. I know they lost in the first round. That's, things happen when you're not a great defense and you're built on a bunch of freshmen, right? And you have the guy from Tommy Boy, Zielinski, go absolutely crazy and make 10 threes against you. Things happen. It's the tournament. What I'm more worried about with this Kentucky team and their chances of getting to the tournament, Evan Miyakawa, who runs evanmia.com, an analytics site, did a study. And in the last 3 years, as the portal era has kind of taken off, there has only been one program at the high major level that had fewer than 16% of their returning minutes, right, end up making the NCAA tournament the next season. That was Iowa State in 2021-22, TJ Otzelberger's first year, right? They had 15.5% of their minutes coming back. Kentucky has 0% of their minutes coming back. The high major teams have never had that happen. Now, Utah State did it last year. Utah State was in the Mountain West, obviously, so it's not completely unheard of. But what Mark Pope is trying to do is a very, very difficult thing. So let's talk a little bit about this roster. They're bringing in Kirk Kriisa. They're bringing in Otega Owe. They're bringing in Lamont Butler. They're bringing in Jackson Robinson, Kobe Brea, Andrew Carr, Ansley Almanor, Andrew Williams, Brandon Garrison, and three freshmen in Trent Noah, Colin Chandler, who is technically going to be I think he had a mission, right? And then I'm blanking on Perry's first name, but they're bringing in the kid Perry, who is Trent Perry, who is a Kentucky native. So they got 12 guys coming in. They got a bunch of shooters coming in. They got 3 guys that can be lockdown defenders, maybe 4, depending on what you think about Brandon Garrison. They got size. They got some versatility. They got a point guard in Kirk Kriisa. I think they have a lot of really good pieces. My biggest question is, well, having a bunch of good pieces that are solid players and not having a superstar to kind of build it all around, is this going to work for him? And what do you see them being in his first season?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you go down the list and you're like, good player, good player, good player, good player, veteran player, veteran player, veteran. Like they're all nice pieces. Do you have that dude? And they don't really have that dude. Let's be honest. Like Jackson Robinson isn't that dude. He's a good player. He's a good player who had a really good year at BYU last year. And that's kind of the beauty of bringing him in late. They needed him because he knows Mark Pope's system, right? All these other guys don't. They don't. You know, Colin Chandler is going to be a really good player, but he's been on a mission for a couple years. You know, what I worry about with them the most, Rob, is you've got two really good defensive guards in Owe and Lamont Butler, and they're especially Butler's offensively challenged. Owe, I think, can be their best player, and I think probably will be their best player this year. So I love Owe, Jackson Robinson. You know, Kirk Kreese is not great defensively. He's got a so I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't know if you've got too many like two-way guards. I think you've got guys that can really guard and guys that can score. And I don't know how that's going to blend together. I think and then on the front court, you mentioned Amari Williams. He did it at the CAA level. There are a lot of coaches at that level that kind of question how good he's going to be, especially in the offensive end in the SEC. Andrew Carr was a nice piece at Wake. Garrison's going to be a backup and in a really good backup. He'll be a really, really good backup talent-wise, but he's got a lot of growing to do maturity-wise. I think this is a team ultimately that gets in the tournament that maybe they win a game. Maybe they win two, but probably they win a game in the NCAA tournament, and that's a good year for Mark Pope in year one taking over in Lexington.
Yeah, that's kind of where I land with them as well. Um, the issue with two-way guards, I do think that there is you're kind of selling Owe and Jackson Robinson a little bit short. Like I kind of the length and athleticism that they have, I'm kind of buying it
I
there.
love Owe. I
Yeah.
love Owe. Love Owe.
The big question I have, I'm a little bit more concerned with the four spot than anything else, right? Because I feel like they have a bunch of guys that you want to be a five at the high major level. I think Andrew Carr, I know he played a little bit of the four alongside Efton Reed at Wake Forest last year, but I don't know if he's necessarily a great defender. But I do think you kind of find yourself in this situation where you are you have guys that are known for being defensive stalwarts, right? Like I remember when they first got a couple of these commitments, it was like, all right, they're bringing in Amari Williams, like he's a really good defender, CAA Defensive
Right.
Player of the Year, right? Oh, they got Lamont Butler, like he can lock down San Diego State. Oh, they got an Ortega Owe. Oh, yeah, I mean, like he can really guard. And it's like, is Mark Pope trying to go all in on defense here? And then
Right.
he
How are
went
they
out.
going to score? Right. And
Yeah.
that's not been Mark Pope's MO. His MO has
Well,
been
so
more.
the one thing I would say is that I think last year they really like Mark Pope put together a team that shot a lot of threes. But in the couple of years before that, like it was a little bit more of a defensive minded team than I think people remember. Like his first year at BYU, all they did was shoot. They were one of the best offenses in the country and they couldn't guard a soul. Last year at BYU, one of the best offenses in the country, weren't really all that good defensively. And then those years in between, they were a lot better defensively and more physical than I think people realize because they think it's BYU. They think everybody's going to be Jimmer Fredette, right? So I think that he is a little bit more well-rounded as a coach, maybe than he gets credit for. But it's also something your point about this is the way that I would phrase it. You look at their best offensive lineup, right? The best five offensively you could put out there, and their best five defensively. How big is the overlap? Where do you like how many guys would be in the best offensive five and the best defensive five? And I don't know if there's any overlap in that. I think you might end up being in a situation where it's like it's five different players. So that's kind of where I'm concerned is like you're gonna have to find
Well,
a
right.
balance
We
there,
haven't
right?
mentioned Kobe Bryant, right? We haven't
Yep.
really mentioned Kobe Bryant, an elite shooter last year, one of the best in the country. But again, he's not out there. If you want to, stop teams, you're going to play Lamont Butler a lot because he's a leader. He's won at the highest level. He can defend. I just don't, I guess again, the question is always how the pieces fit together. And we don't know that. Like, I don't think Mark Pope has an idea really
No,
of
you can't.
right. Especially in the perimeter. Like again, up front, you got three guys. You got three guys really for two spots for the most part, unless you want to go small.
I think the Ansley Almanor kid, the Fairleigh Dickinson
Yeah,
transfer, I think
we'll see.
will be useful for like 10 minutes a game.
Right. But you have a lot of guys. I mean, you go through the perimeter and you've got legitimately, I don't know if 7 guys are going to fight for spots because, again, I don't think Travis Perry is going to be ready this year. And I'm not sure Colin Chandler, just shaking the rust off from the mission, will be ready out of the gates. I think he's going to be a terrific player. You and I saw him a couple summers ago. He's really, really, really talented. But again, I think you're talking about 5 guys for the majority of the minutes on the perimeter, which is what 120 minutes divided by 5 ways.
Yeah, that's going to be the hard part, and we'll see with a lot of programs in college basketball this year. But you have a lot of guys coming in from programs where they played a lot of minutes, where they're going to be going to Kentucky expecting to play a lot of minutes, and whether or not they accept the role is going to be a big question mark. Whether you are a world-class athlete or a podcaster like myself, we all understand the importance of mental and physical well-being and proper recovery for top-notch performance. After a 6-month season loaded with cross-country travel and late nights, I can promise you that proper recovery is a priority for me these days. That is why I'm excited that Unified Healing is sponsoring this episode of The Field of 68. Unified Healing is a new and super innovative global network of wellness centers that's powered by the Energy Enhancement System, or the EE system. If you haven't heard of the EE system yet, you'll want to listen up. This technology promotes wellness, deep relaxation, purification, and rejuvenation. Whether you're here in New Jersey or at hundreds of other locations across the globe, access to a center is easy and affordable. Are you interested in experiencing the EE system technology for yourself? Well, all you got to do is go to unifiedhealing.com/field to learn more and find a center near you. You can find that link in the description below. That's unified, UNIFYD healing.com/field. No material or testimonials on the Unified Healing website are intended to be viewed as medical advice or as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment, and before you undertake a new healthcare regimen, including the EE system.
Rob, here's what I do like. Here's what I do like. All right. So again, we know teams win with experience, especially when you throw together a brand new team. Okay. Because you're going to have to be able to teach them quickly to get up to speed. Right. And it's hard to do that with freshmen and sophomores. You'd much rather do it with guys who've been in college for 3-4 years. Again, Creasa, 5th year. Jackson Robinson, 5th year. Butler, 5th year. Kobe Bryant, 5th year. Andrew Carr, 5th year. Amari Williams, 5th year. Like, that's a lot of dudes that at least you can hopefully get them up and running a little bit quicker. And the other point that you made with Evan Mia's stats, whatever, the numbers that 16, unless you return whatever it was, 16% of your scoring, you're basically screwed. You're not making the NCAA tournament. What I'll say to that is you're right based on the past. But I think you're dealing with more and more teams right now than ever that have had that type of turnover and high profile teams, Arkansas, Louisville, Kentucky, a bunch of the portal just isn't, there's more to it. There's more turnover this year than ever. So I don't know if that's so steadfast as it's been. We'll see. I mean, I still think
it
it's
won't. It'll change this year. It'll absolutely change this year, because I do think Kentucky's going to end up being a tournament team. So at the very least, you'll have at least one team that doesn't return a single minute from the previous year. For X Factor, for me, it is Jackson Robinson and Otega Owe. One of those two, for my money, has to step up and be a star for this team. Like, you need someone that's going to be an all SEC caliber player if you're going to compete at the top of the SEC, right? If you're going to have a chance to be a top 25 team and you're the University of Kentucky, you need a guy that is all conference good, first team all conference good. And I think it would have to be one of those two, but I'm not convinced that either of those two are actually first team all conference good, right? Like was Oway in the mix for first team all conference in the Big 12 last season? Not really. Was Jackson Robinson? No, he didn't. He came off the bench for BYU. Was Kirk Risa? No. So that's my biggest question is someone needs to be the star for this team. Someone needs to be the go-to guy. Someone needs to be the player that can handle being the top of the scouting report if they're going to be more than like a top 25-ish 7 seed. You know, if they want to replicate what they were last year, what BYU season last year was, that's perfectly fine. I think it's a perfectly acceptable year for Mark Pope's first season there. But if you want to be more than that, you got to have a star. Who's the star? Who steps up?
Yeah, and I think even taking that a step further, it's who is going to take the shot with the game on the line, because you're going to have a lot of close games. You know that. Like, this Kentucky team's not going to be blowing teams out. They're probably not going to get blown out a lot. I think you're going to be in a lot of, 1 or 2 possession games at the end, because frankly, too, you look at the SEC, you got Alabama that may be a step above everybody right now, but like there's a lot of similar teams in there. So who is going to be that guy that, as you said, like is going to want to be the guy and capable of being the guy, and you give him the ball and say, hey, go make a play, whether it's you're making a play for yourself or you're getting your teammates involved and getting them an easy one. I mean, that's the other part we haven't really talked about too, is like, all right, again, you play Lamont Butler. Okay, if you play him with Amari Williams, for example, you got 2 guys in there that are really not much of offensive threats. What's the spacing gonna be like? Like
I,
how,
I'm not
teams
worried about that.
defensively, what they can do to. And again, the good thing with Pope is he'll have options, and I think it'll play itself out. But it may take some time. And oh, by the way, they play some good games early.
Yeah, I'm not worried about the spacing as much because I think that the style of offense that Pope runs, there's going to be that they play so much on the perimeter. There's going to be so much movement that I think he'll be able to find a way to create space with where he has people situated on the floor, right? Like just to use UConn as an example from last season, it wasn't like Donovan Clingan and Steph Castle were really great floor spacers, and they still found a way to be able to create plenty of space. And there's outside of like the 3 defensive guys, there are enough shooters. So I think that if he does what he did last year in terms of creatively running offense, I think it should be fine. But I get what you're saying. It goes back to the whole idea of do they have guys that are 2-way players or they have defenders?
So
Or they have
hard.
scores?
It's so
Yeah.
hard because when you do the portal like this, you're just taking dudes, right? You're just taking, like, okay, we can get Lamont Butler, we can get Amari Williams. All right, what's the price? Let's take him and figure it out from there. Okay, all right, you know what? We can get Oway. We got to take him because if we miss on him, we don't know who's next.
Well,
And
you got to build a roster. You need 12 guys. Like you got to
well,
go
you don't
get
need
it.
12. No, you don't need 12 anymore. To be honest, I don't think you need 12 that can play. I think 10 is the number, because I think 12, first of all, those last couple of guys better be guys, if 11 and 12 that know they're not really going to play. They're not taking up NIL, number one, and they're also not whining and complaining. They know they're 11 and 12, whether they're, a Travis Perry type that's going to wait his turn, whatever it is. But I think on this team, what do you have? You have 10, right? You have 10 guys right now, really.
Yeah. Well, I
10
mean,
guys.
the bottom line is they have 12 guys, so they'll actually be able to play 5-on-5 in practice. Like if you have 9,
Yeah.
like who's stepping in? You got Mark Pope running the 5 for the scout team.
No,
Is that
you
what's
have
gonna happen
that fifth assistant better be a young dude who can get out on the
here?
floor and do some things or something. I just
That's why
listen.
Cal brought Tyler Eulis to Arkansas, huh? So get have someone on the
Well,
scout
he
team
can't
point
play
guard.
anymore. No, his career is basically over. He can't do much. But I think with this program going forward, I don't know how much pressure there's going to be on Mark Pope year one to do a ton. I think they're so happy to have him. He can't have a bad year. He cannot have a bad year. But I think as long as they're a team that's, in the top 5 in the SEC, and then they win a tournament game or two, I think everybody will be saying, all right, you know what, give them time. And then next year will be more pivotal because then the gap closes without the COVID kids. Then are you going to make a push for some of the top freshmen? Can you do that?
That's a perfect segue, Goodman. That's a perfect segue because you said make the tournament top 5 in the SEC, maybe win a game in the NCAA tournament, right? I think top 5 in the SEC is a little bit more difficult than most people are going to realize, right? Alabama is the clear-cut favorite. I don't think that you would argue with that. I think that they are. I would have them number 1 in the country right now. And once you get past Alabama, you got Arkansas, you got Auburn, you got Tennessee, all of whom have a chance to be top 15 teams. I think Ole Miss is going to be borderline top 25 this year in the preseason. I think Florida is going to be borderline top 25 in the preseason. And I think Mississippi State is better than people are giving them credit for. I think they have a chance to be a tournament team this year with a potential. Like I would not be shocked if Mississippi State was ranked for multiple weeks at some point during this season, which is a long-winded way of saying there are 8 teams at the top of the SEC, 7 behind Alabama, that I think have a chance that you could make an argument could finish top 3 in this conference. And I don't know if I would necessarily have Kentucky in the top 5 in the like. I think you can make a really strong case that Arkansas, Auburn, Tennessee, and one of Ole Miss or Florida will finish above Kentucky this year. So I think top 5 in the SEC it's not going to be. It's not a layup. It's not easy.
Well, again, I mean, one of the things that Kentucky fans have to be realistic about is all those teams, other than Arkansas, you mentioned, have a pretty good core returning, right? I mean, at least a couple guys that were core players back. I mean, Ole Miss has a few. Tennessee lost a bunch, but still has a couple back, and Alabama's got a bunch back, and they loaded up. So, yeah, I think that's the part where you have to be realistic about this year if you're Kentucky fans. Let Mark Pope get in there, implement his system, get comfortable, get his staff in there. The players it's gonna take time for them to gel. And then next year, the key is, and I don't know how many guys you do that's the other part. You're always looking, okay, other than Owe, who else could come back? Travis Perry and Colin Chandler, hopefully they're back in Garrison. So those are 4 potential guys. Well, you got to bring back a minimum of 2 a year. You can't be doing this every year. This was out of necessity, obviously, because you weren't retaining anybody from the Cal era. You really weren't. I mean, nobody was coming back. So, you just got to make sure going forward, you're not taking all 5th-year guys or all seniors, because you don't want to be doing this every single year. You want to keep a couple guys, minimum of 2. I think, the magic number is, can you keep about a third of your roster each year? You keep a third, you graduate a third, and you lose a third to transfer. If you can do that, you're in great shape.
I think you need more than a third coming back. I think if you really want to be competing for at the top of these conferences for national,
but you're not, Rob. You're going to lose. Everybody who doesn't start is going to transfer for the most part. Almost everybody who doesn't start. Now, again, I think Colin Chandler's a little bit different situation. Okay, like that's a different deal. But I think a lot of these kids, they're not waiting their turn. So I'm telling you, retention is going to be at an all-time low. I mean, it already is, but it's not going to be that different because of NIL.
Yep. All right. So give your off-season grade for the University of Kentucky, not for Mark Pope.
I mean, given the circumstances,
but for Kentucky, the program, not the.
I'm giving it a B plus. I'm going to give him a B plus. I think given the circumstances and where they were at, and You know, a lot of people were happy, obviously, with the hiring of Mark Pope, and I thought it was a really good hire. You know, again, I'll say this over and over for people that don't know. Um, this dude is a worker. This dude is a worker, and I don't think people understood that when he was hired at Kentucky. Like Calipari was not a worker at the end. He wasn't. Now, I think, again, going to Arkansas, that'll probably revitalize him. But he was not a worker at the highest level the last few years. He also didn't connect with the fan base like Mark Pope is going to do and already has done. So I think that was a perfect hire for what Kentucky needed in this day and age. And I think what Pope and his staff did, you know, he put together a good staff also. Number one, you know, again, it's the head coach, and then you better put together a good staff. You better be able to raise money, which Pope's going to be able to do in Lexington. And then I thought he did a very good job for the most part. I just want to see how the pieces fit, but I would give him a B plus.
So I'm going to go a little bit lower than that, and I would give the program a B minus. And the reason I would give them a B minus is because they missed on Hurley, they missed on Oates, and they missed really publicly on Scott Drew. Now, the reason I'm not lower on them after whiffing on those three is because they were like they cycled through this very, very quickly. If you remember, we did like a live reaction. Scott Drew says no to Kentucky on, I believe it was one morning, right? And then that by that night, it was like, okay, well, now they're hiring Mark Pope. Like they got through the process very, very quickly. It wasn't something that was long and drawn out, but they missed on the three big names that they went after as the University of Kentucky. And while he got a good roster put together, you are Kentucky, and I don't know if there's an NBA player on the roster. I don't know if there is a star on the roster. So I think that you put together a team that is going to compete for the top 25 that has a really good shot of making the tournament, which is really good. Like you got to rebuild stuff, you got to work
Got
quickly.
to start somewhere.
But it's also Kentucky, so I'll give them a B minus on that with room for upside if I end up
What did you grade? Hey, what was your grade of Bully Clyde Gillespie when he got hired?
negative. Like you can't, I don't like a Z. Do they have
I
grades
gave it
that
an F,
low?
I think, back then.
Yeah,
I literally think I might have given it an F.
yeah, it was not the best. So listen, this has been another episode of the off-season grades. We have about 45 of these coming out over the course of July and August and heading into September when we will start doing some very real season preview content. Goodman, it's always a pleasure, man. It's July. We have to talk about something in college basketball. So off-season grades. We'll see you on the next episode.